The afternoon light poured through the cafe window, striking the table where Adil sat pretending to read a book he'd already finished days ago. He liked the illusion of concentration, it kept people from asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. The noise of steaming milk and soft jazz blurred around him until the door opened and Ryan stepped in. For a moment, the world seemed to hush. Ryan wasn't extraordinary in the usual sense, no model's precision, no showy confidence, but something about his quiet poise unsettled Adil's practiced calm. He watched the newcomer search for a seat, fingers brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. When their eyes met, it was no accident. Ryan smiled, the kind of smile that suggests he recognizes you from somewhere, even if he doesn't. Adil looked away first. His pulse beat faster, though he told himself it was silly. He had a partner, Sammy, patient and dependable, someone who knew how to steady him when anxiety pressed too close. Yet lately, Adil had begun to feel like a guest in his own relationship, moving through polite routines that no longer reached the heart. Ryan ordered coffee and took the seat opposite. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, voice soft but certain. "Not at all," Adil replied, hoping the tremor in his tone went unnoticed. They spoke at first about harmless things, the weather's sudden heat, the cafe's music, the book in Adil's hands. Ryan's laughter was unguarded, like a melody freed from discipline. He had a way of listening that made Adil feel seen rather than observed. Each question he asked carried genuine curiosity, and each silence between them felt comfortable instead of awkward. Minutes turned into an hour. Adil learned that Ryan was new in town, working in design, still searching for people who made the city less strange. "You're the first person I've met who doesn't sound tired of living here," Ryan said. "Maybe I just sound tired in a different way," Adil replied before realizing how honest that sounded. Ryan tilted his head, studying him. "Then I hope you find a reason not to be." Something in that line lodged itself in Adil's chest. He smiled, but the words followed him long after the conversation drifted elsewhere. When Ryan left, their goodbye carried an awkward hesitation, 2 seconds longer than politeness required. That night, Adil replayed the encounter while Sammy spoke beside him about weekend plans. He nodded at the right moments, but his mind wandered back to the cafe, the way sunlight had caught Ryan's eyes, the warmth in his voice. Guilt pricked at him, faint but undeniable. It wasn't love, he told himself, it was curiosity, the mind's small rebellion against routine. The next day brought a message. "You left your bookmark at the cafe. Want to come get it?" Adil hadn't realized he'd dropped anything, yet the excuse felt both transparent and irresistible. He typed back, "Sure." "When?" They met again, this time under a gray sky that promised rain. Conversation came easier, familiarity already woven between them. They walked through the park until drizzle forced them beneath an awning. Ryan spoke about beginnings, the thrill and the fear of not knowing what something might become. Adil listened, his heart tightening with recognition. When the rain eased, Ryan said, "Maybe we could talk somewhere quieter. I'd like to hear more about your book." Adil hesitated. He thought of Sammy waiting at home, of the dull comfort that awaited him there. Then he looked at Ryan, open, expectant, unknowingly dangerous. "All right," he said finally. "My place isn't far." Ryan nodded, his smile gentle, grateful. As they walked side by side, Adil felt the air between them shift, charged but uncertain. He wasn't sure what awaited beyond his door, only that he had already stepped across an unseen line. The city lights flickered on as they disappeared into the narrow street, 2 figures moving towards something they didn't yet understand, but neither willing to turn back. Adil unlocked the door to his small apartment, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan greeting them as they stepped inside. The city's noise dulled behind the walls, replaced by an almost fragile stillness. Ryan stood by the doorway, his gaze tracing the shelves lined with books and photographs. "It's cozy," Ryan said, setting his bag down. "Small, but it feels like mine," Adil replied, trying to sound casual though his heartbeat betrayed him that he made tea, grateful for the few moments of distraction. From the kitchen, he watched Ryan through the half-open door, how he moved gently through the space, respectful but curious, pausing to look at the framed photo of Adil and Sammy on the side table. Ryan didn't comment, and Adil didn't explain. Silence said enough. When Adil brought the cups over, the steam curled upward like breath suspended between them. They sat opposite each other, the air heavy with the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but charged, filled with unspoken thoughts and shifting emotions. Ryan broke it first. "You seem different today. Quieter." Adil smiled faintly. "Maybe because I don't know what I'm supposed to say." "Then don't say anything," Ryan said softly. "Sometimes silence explains more than words ever can." Adil looked at him then, really looked. Ryan's expression held no demand, only understanding, and that frightened him more than desire ever could. Because in that gaze was a reflection of something Adil had buried for too long, the wish to be known without pretense. That he leaned back, struggling to keep his voice steady. "You know, I didn't plan any of this. I don't even know what this is." Ryan nodded slowly. "Maybe it doesn't have to be defined yet. Maybe it's just two people meeting at the right time, or the wrong one." Adil's laugh was quiet, almost bitter. "You make it sound poetic." "Maybe it is," Ryan said. "Poetry usually starts where reason ends." The words lingered between them, pulling at something deep inside Adil. He thought of Sammy, steady, predictable, kind. A life that made sense on paper. But sitting across from Ryan, he felt the ache of everything that life had failed to stir. This wasn't about betrayal, not really. It was about recognition, about meeting someone who mirrored the emptiness you couldn't name. Rain began tapping against the window, faint and rhythmic. The sound filled the pauses, cushioning their conversation as it slipped from light topics into confessions. Adil spoke of the loneliness that hid beneath his routines, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine. Ryan listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving Adil's face. When he finally spoke, his tone was quiet but sure. "You don't have to apologize for wanting more." The sentence cut through Adil's defenses. It was simple, but it carried the weight of permission, something no one had ever given him. He didn't reply, he couldn't. The walls that guarded him began to loosen, piece by piece, until all that remained was the fragile truth he'd kept buried beneath duty and fear. Minutes stretched, elastic and uncertain. Adil felt the distance between them shrink, not in movement, but in understanding. Every look, every silence became a language of its own. Then, almost as if needing to save himself from the moment, he stood. "I should get some air," he murmured, stepping toward the window. Ryan joined him there, their reflections blurred together in the glass. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the wet streets. Inside, Adil could feel the gravity of the choice forming, quiet but unstoppable. Ryan turned to him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you're afraid of, you don't have to face it alone." Adil met his gaze. The words should have comforted him, but they only deepened the ache. Because he knew that what was happening, whatever name it took, would change everything. The rain softened to a drizzle. Ryan reached for his jacket, sensing the shift. "I should go," he said gently. Adil wanted to protest but didn't. Instead, he walked him to the door. Their goodbye was brief, but the silence that followed carried the weight of something unfinished. When the door closed, Adil leaned against it, exhaling the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The apartment felt different now, emptier, yet charged with memory. He looked at the untouched tea, now cold, and whispered into the still air, "What have I done?" Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if echoing the storm he'd just invited into his heart. Morning arrived gently, with pale light spilling through the curtains and the distant sound of birds outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and sharp, the world outside washed clean. I opened my eyes slowly, unsure of what time it was, or what I might find when I turned my head. Ayan was already awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor as though lost somewhere else. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, but his stillness was new, a kind of quiet I had never seen in him before. For a few seconds, I just watched him, the same way I had watched the wedding lights flicker the night before, caught between admiration and uncertainty. Then, sensing my gaze, he turned slightly. "Morning," he said. His voice was calm, maybe too calm. "Morning, I echoed. Neither of us mentioned the night. The silence between us wasn't heavy or awkward, it was careful, as though we both knew that saying the wrong thing could shatter something fragile. That he stood and stretched, glancing at the window. "Looks like the wedding's over," he said, forcing a small smile. "The world's back to normal." I wanted to believe that, to let his words carry us back to the easy friendship we'd always had. But normal felt distant, like a place we'd already left without realizing it. When he went to wash up, I sat there listening to the water run. The sound felt strangely symbolic, as if the night were being rinsed away, leaving us both clean but changed. That we joined the rest of the family for breakfast. No one noticed our quietness, everyone was too busy packing, laughing, reminiscing about the wedding. Ayan slipped easily into conversation, joking with cousins, helping load bags into the car. He looked like himself again, bright, effortless, untouchable, and yet, every time our eyes met, there was that flicker, recognition of something shared, something unspoken. On the drive home, the road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by fields shining with morning dew. We barely spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was filled with thought. I kept wondering if I should say something, to name what had happened, or to ask if he remembered it the way I did. But each time I opened my mouth, the words dissolved before reaching my tongue. Halfway through the journey, Ayan turned down the music and said quietly, "Last night was strange, wasn't it?" His voice was steady, but the way he gripped the steering wheel gave him away. "Yes," I said after a pause. "It was." He nodded slowly. "I don't know what it meant. He stopped himself, shaking his head with a soft laugh. "Forget it. Maybe it's better not to think too much." I wanted to agree, to let it go, but a part of me didn't want to forget. Some moments, I realized, are not meant to be understood, only remembered. That we reached home by afternoon. As he dropped me off, he smiled again, that familiar, easy smile I'd known for years. But his eyes lingered for a moment longer than usual. "Take care," he said. "You too," I replied. That he drove away, and I watched his car disappear down the road until it was gone. The emptiness that followed wasn't sadness exactly, more like the echo of a song after the last note fades. In the days that followed, we spoke less. Texts became shorter, calls more infrequent. Life filled the spaces where words didn't. Yet, whenever I thought of that night, it wasn't guilt I felt, it was a kind of gratitude. For the closeness. For the honesty of a moment that had no name. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the rain begins again, I think of that wedding, of golden lights, laughter, and a night that changed everything without saying a word. What we shared wasn't a mistake, nor was it something that could continue. It was simply a truth, brief, fragile, and unforgettable, that taught me how complicated love can be when it lives in silence. And though life went on, a part of me always returned to that single night, not for what happened, but for what it revealed. That even in the quietest moments, the heart speaks louder than words ever can.